Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our District 5360 orientation series. Today's presentation is When the Poo Hits the Fan. My name is Jeff McFarland, and I am in charge of orientations for the District 5360 Youth Exchange Committee. And for the presentation today, I have with me Jaden Bax. Jaden is not only a former exchange student, but he's also a member of the Youth Exchange Committee. And more importantly for outbound students, he is going to be their district coordinator for next year. Welcome, Jaden.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jeff.
No problem. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what your role is?
Yeah, I think you've kind of opened it up nicely. I'm the outbound coordinator for all 10 students, for the parents who don't know. So the students all know me a little bit by now. Was an exchange student in 2003, 2004, and have come back to be involved with the committee. And I'm basically, I should be the highest level that somebody ever has to reach if the poo hits the fan. I'm the one that will be dealing with the other districts and for little things before they become big things, and just make sure that this is as positive an experience as possible for everybody. We know that there's going to be hiccups, and if it gets to that, I'm the guy that can help solve them.
Perfect. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some of those hiccups and what to do when they actually happen. So I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully this will all work out all right. So Jaden, if you could just confirm that you actually now see the slide presentation.
Yeah, I do, but I think you've popped up both of our faces in front
Oh,
of the sharing
I,
screen.
I, I can fix that.
Yep,
There you go.
there we be.
So now we have the slide presentation. So the first part I guess we want to talk about is that all of the former exchange students always tell us that we should not sugarcoat exchange and tell you that there are going to be bad days. So just like you're going to have bad days where you hear all next year, there are probably going to be times when you have bad days and you're going to get into some kind of trouble while you're on exchange. That's just a natural thing that's going to happen. The difference is you're a little bit more apt to get in some kind of trouble because you're going to a place that you don't know. You don't necessarily speak the language perfectly well, and you don't know the ins and outs of the culture and what is normal there and what's not. So the probability of you getting in trouble is a little bit higher while you're away on exchange than it is if you're just sitting here in southern Alberta. But that's what we're here for, is to help you work through those different kinds of problems that you might have. And so the first thing that we want to talk about is travel. And of course, you'll be leaving on exchange probably sometime in August. For those of you going to some southern climes, it might actually be a little earlier in July, and there are a few that might actually go out next September. But the one thing that you should probably know about our travel is that our travel agent books all of the tickets for our exchange students. So what he's going to do is find out exactly where you're supposed to end up at, and he will try and book you the most direct flight from Calgary to wherever it is you're going. In most cases, that means you're probably going to have a layover somewhere because there aren't a lot of direct flights from Calgary anywhere. There is a direct flight from Calgary to Amsterdam. There's a direct flight from Calgary to Zurich. There's a direct flight from Calgary to Frankfurt. And I believe over the summer period now, there's going to be on WestJet a direct flight from Calgary to Rome. So we'd be able to get you close to where you're going, but not exactly all the way. So you're more than likely going to have a stop somewhere along the way, and that's usually where things can go wrong. So lots of times, well, I shouldn't say lots of times, what may happen at that layover is your flight leaving Calgary gets delayed and you miss your connection, or your connection somehow gets canceled on the other side, or your flight gets delayed, your connecting flight gets delayed, and you're not going to end up where you're supposed to be when you said, when you originally thought you were going to get there. And Jaden, you might have heard some more recent stories about these things than I have, but it seems to me that almost every year we end up with a student that ends up not being where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there.
Yeah, every year it's an incredibly common thing. When you get 10 to 15 people traveling, there's always going to be one or two. And luckily, this is, of all the problems you're going to run into, is far and away the easiest one to deal with, I would say. A lot of you are not going to have ever traveled by yourselves, but I don't think that's necessarily problematic if you kind of follow the hierarchy of people that you should get in touch with. And the first and foremost of those, the most important, is somebody from your airline at the airport. You have to, figure out your stuff, figure out what the next step is. There's the possibility that maybe you're going to have to stay overnight to catch a flight the next day. You have to get that all worked out. And then before you leave, you should make sure that you have already spoken to your inbound counselor, if you know who they are, your host family, anybody who could possibly be meeting you at the airport. And you have all of their contact information with you, so that once you get those details, you can pass that along as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and the one thing that we would definitely suggest from the exchange committee side is that while you're traveling, make sure that you wear your blazer that you're going to get at March orientation. So all of you were fitted for a blazer here in January. You're going to get that very dignified red Canadian blazer. Uh, Not all Rotary Youth Exchange blazers are red. In fact, I believe Canadians are the only ones that have red. The vast majority of them are blue, but they do come in a few different other colors as well. But they signify that they immediately identify you as an exchange student to anybody that's in the airport. So they'll know that you're a Rotary exchange student. And there are just countless stories of exchange students who have been helped by Rotarians somewhere along the way on their trip. In fact, I have a story. I was at the Calgary airport a few years ago now, and we were actually taking one of my former exchange students who had come for a visit back to the airport, and we were standing in line to go through security when a young fellow in a Swiss jacket, so the Swiss also have a very distinctive color, theirs is kind of burgundy. He went with somebody who was obviously from airport security, passed us in the lineup and went to talk to somebody at the front of the lineup. And then he turned around and came back and kind of, I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't get the answer he was looking for. So as he went back by, I stopped him and said, "Hey, I'm with the District 5360 Exchange Committee. I see you're a Rotary Exchange student. Is there something I can help you with?" And he was actually on his way. He had caught that direct flight that came out of Zurich and landed in Calgary and was on his way through to Kelowna and somehow managed to get out from security without any of his baggage. So we got in touch with people from the airline and people from Canada Customs, got him hooked up back with his luggage and back on his flight to Kelowna, and he was back on his way. So because he was wearing his jacket, I knew he was an exchange student and was able to help him out. If you wear your jacket while you're traveling, or at least take it with you and have it, if you get into any kind of trouble at all, Rotary is a really big organization, and you'll likely run into somebody who's be more than willing to help you out. So Jaden talked a little bit about what happens if you're going to be delayed while you're traveling. Again, you're most likely to run into a problem when you get onto a connecting flight. If you're delayed here out of Calgary, you might miss a connecting flight wherever you're going to, or you might have a flight delayed or canceled at your connection. The one thing to remember is that there are more than likely going to be people waiting for you at the other side. And they don't want to stand around the airport all day waiting for you and don't want to not have you show up. So they're going to be looking for you at the other side. If something happens en route, most airports these days have Wi-Fi and you're able to connect with a laptop or with your phone. Make sure you connect who's ever waiting for you on the other side and let them know that, that you're going to be late. If the delay is anything serious and you're not able to resolve it with a connection from, or sorry, with a contact from the airline, please do get in touch with Jaden. Jaden, I know during that time in July and August, you never sleep and are sitting at home waiting by the phone for exchange students to contact you all the time. Jaden will be there for you.
I will. And he says that facetiously, but everybody has my number now. We have that WhatsApp group. I'm very happy to answer a call at 3 a.m. if you're panicking and not sure what the next moves are. So it's said jokingly, but it's very serious. It's why we do what we do. I'm always available if you come into a situation where you need a little extra help.
And of course, we'll also give you the contact information for our travel agent. So the minute you need to get in contact with Jaden, you can certainly send him an email. Make sure you copy Max, our travel agent. And if something happens to your connecting flight, we'll all be working very hard here in Calgary to make sure that we find a way for you to get where you need to go. In the meantime, Jaden and the rest of the committee here also has numerous contacts at various different places around the world. If you're stuck in an airport for any length of time, we'd be happy to see if we can't find a Rotarian that would pick you up and take you home for a place to sleep, or at least make sure that you get a meal. So you're never alone while you're stuck in an airport abroad. Rotarians will find you, and if you can't find them, we'll make sure that somebody from this side hooks you up. When you get to the other side into a host country, or depending on where you're entering the European Union at, you're going to have to go through customs and immigration. The one thing we really want to suggest is that you not make any jokes about bombs or being terrorists or anything like that. You'll find yourself on a plane home faster than you got on the plane to go. So I found this nice little picture of Yoda. Funny you are not, especially in a foreign language. If you're trying to make jokes in a language that you're not really great at, it's probably not as funny as you thought it was. When you arrive at your final destination, you will probably be met by your host family. Lots of times they will have a sign up for you with your name on, just so that you know who they are. Hopefully you will have seen them and got together in a Skype conversation, or a WhatsApp conversation, or a conversation of some kind, so you have an idea of what they look like. But if not, they're likely to have a sign of some kind there for you. There are also maybe members of your host Rotary Club there to meet you. Often your inbound counselor is there, and there may actually even be people from the district there. So when we have students that are inbound here to Calgary, we make sure that they all come on a particular weekend. And there are always a few of us from the district committee that are there at the airport, no matter what the hour is, to make sure that those students are met by their host families and their host clubs, and get out of the airport and off to where they're supposed to be going.
And you'll notice in the picture that the student is wearing their blazer. Whether they wore it the whole flight or not is irrelevant. When they came out, they were wearing it. And right away, whether they had connected with that family or not beforehand, immediately recognizable.
So that is Carla, who is from Switzerland. So she's got that burgundy Swiss jacket on, and she actually, those are two host families that she's got. Both her first and second host family. Carla was in Medicine Hat and was met by two of her host families here at the airport. The next thing we want to talk about is if you run into some medical issues, and of course that can always happen. We had a student here in District 5360 a few years ago who decided that he was going, well, he was interested in martial arts before he came, and was taking a martial arts course, and about the first week he was here, was in a competition and got kicked in the mouth and put his teeth through his lower lip and had to go for some stitches. And the first thing he asked is that nobody tell his mother what had actually happened to him. So the important part to remember is that if you run into any kind of medical issues while you're abroad, you have insurance for that. So your exchange agreement, so the exchange agreement that we have with the other district will specify which insurance you're supposed to have. Sometimes you're required to have the insurance that is prescribed by your host district. Sometimes you will have insurance that we have our outbound exchange students here get. In either case, all of those insurances are vetted by Rotary International, and they have to meet certain standards. So they're all pretty much the same. You will get a little card that has your insurance information on it. It's always a good idea to make sure that everybody that you're around, your host families, your inbound counselor, have copies of that card so that they have your insurance information, just in case you're not able to produce it because you're unconscious or something like that. The one thing that's kind of important to remember is that most of the insurance policies require that you contact them in advance before having any serious tests or screening done. If that's not possible, so if you're unconscious or if it's an emergency event where you have to get something done before you can contact them, they usually require that somebody contact them within 24 hours. So again, if your host family is aware of that situation and has a copy of your card, or if your inbound counselor is aware and has a copy of the card, they should be able to contact them for you. Jaden will also know all about all of your insurance information. So at the very least, if something bad happens, get in contact with Jaden, and he'll be able to make sure that we're following through with the insurance in the proper format.
Yeah, it'll all be uploaded into Yay. A lot of our partner districts use Yay, so they should have access to that as well, but not all of them. Just another good strategy to save your insurance card in your contact card. So when you're sending your contact information to different people as you get there, that whole contact card with your number, your email, everything in it, it goes along with it. So everybody that you send your contact information to, who you might be spending time with, has access to your insurance card.
Okay. Next thing we want to talk is about some legal issues. And of course, it's easy enough to run into legal issues by accident. But we talked a little bit in our rules session a while back that if you run into legal trouble, that's the one thing Rotary really can't help you with. The most likely case, if you do something serious enough, is that your visa would be canceled and you'll be deported. And that's the best case scenario. We'd really rather not have you end up in jail somewhere abroad, because that is even harder to deal with. And in most cases, if that happens, you'll be home before anybody at the Youth Exchange Committee even knows that something's happened. So make sure that you have at least a basic understanding of what rules are. Lots of times your host parents may seem that they're a little overly protective of you. In lots of cases, many of you will be driving here in Southern Alberta, and you still have a lot of freedom and things like that. That's not always the case where you're going, and that's simply because sometimes your host parents want to make sure that you have the street smarts and know what's going on in the culture before they are willing to give you the kind of freedom that you might be used to here. Abuse and harassment. We're going to do a whole session on this a little later on, so that will be another thing that we'll have in Google Classroom a little later on. But what we wanted you to know, and especially parents, to make you feel a little bit better, we wanted you to know that everybody that's involved in Youth Exchange as a Rotarian is screened and takes some training in the areas of abuse and harassment. In our district, that means that we have to do an online course, and I'm actually going to have all of you parents do the online course as part of our Google Classroom session here a little later on. And they have to pass a test. So in order to be a host family, or in order to be a Rotarian that deals with any of our youth programs, including Youth Exchange, they're required to have this test done. Not only that, but they're required to have a police screening done. So they do a police search that requires them to give their birth date and sex. And should your birth date and sex correspond with anybody that's on the sexual predators list, as mine does, then you have to go through and do a set of fingerprints. Your fingerprints go off to depending on which police service you are, the RCMP here in Okotoks, and they come back and send you a letter that says either yes or no, you match up with the person that is on the sex offenders list. Fortunately, that hasn't happened, which is why I'm able to talk to you, because if it came back the other way around, I wouldn't be doing this session. The other thing you need to know is that Rotary as an organization takes abuse and harassment very seriously. There are policies in place to protect all of our students involved in any of our youth programs, and any Rotarian that becomes aware of abuse or harassment is required to report to Rotary International within 3 days. So there's a whole formal process to do that. We here in District 5360 and most other districts around the world have a policy in place, and there's actually an emergency response team in place that should any of these allegations come to light, the emergency response team is activated, and they do an investigation and have to file some papers and paperwork with Rotary International within 3 days of becoming aware of the situation. Not only that, there are, of course, legal obligations where what has happened is against the law. Anybody, not just Rotarians, has a legal obligation to report those to the proper legal authorities. So what I would say is if something happens during your exchange, and it's entirely possible, even with all the screening and things we do, can't guarantee that you won't end up in a situation where bad things happen. And it may not be at a host family, it may be at school, or it may be with other exchange students or with friends out somewhere else. But if something bad is happening, the really important thing to remember is to tell somebody and to keep telling people until somebody does something about it. We're going to, in a little bit, go through kind of the hierarchy of how to escalate issues. But I think, Jaden, the probably number one thing to remember is if nobody's listening to you in anything that you're saying, Jaden is here. And Jaden is going to listen to you, and Jaden's going to take action.
And especially in the cases of abuse, we sometimes hear students come back after their year that there were certain situations, maybe not quite to the abuse level, but that they were uncomfortable with, that they didn't want to come forward with because they were afraid of it terminating their exchange. That is not the case in any way whatsoever. The abused is never the person who is going to be punished. We're going to make sure to put that person in a safer situation. And yeah, it's you know, if you're not comfortable talking to your inbound counselor, your outbound counselor, if you're not comfortable talking to me, find somebody within Rotary that you're comfortable talking to. It could be Linda, Fran, somebody at your club level, and it's never going to be kept secret. I'm very likely going to hear about it. Linda will very likely hear about it, but we need to hear about that so that we can make sure that we're reporting to RI within those 3 days and doing things in the correct manner. And so when we talk about that hierarchy later, this abuse and harassment is a little bit separate from that. If it's gone to the point where it's passed into that abuse and harassment level, you don't have to feel like you have to go through all those steps. Come to the person that's going to be an advocate for you and do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, tell everybody.
Yep.
Don't go through the chain. Send out a mass email and tell everybody all at once.
Yep.
So the important part to remember is Jaden can make things happen, right? He has the ability to be in contact with the district on the other side and either get something happen, make something happen for you. So if you need to change host families, Jaden's the place to start. We can certainly start to make those things happen. If you need to change schools, Jaden can work some magic and make things like that happen. So the important part is don't sit and suffer in silence. Get in touch with everybody, but definitely Jaden, and we can make sure that you're safe as soon as possible. We talked during one of our other presentations about the 6 Ds. So hopefully all of you now remember what those are. We'll talk a bit about them again at our orientation in March. The other thing that I wanted to remind you is that during your inbound orientation in your host country, they're probably going to explain any variances of those rules, any nuances of those rules, and maybe some others. So it's really important to pay attention to those rules during your inbound orientation. What's important for you to know is that anytime somebody wants to end an exchange, it usually requires the approval of the chairman of the Youth Exchange Committee on both sides. So both wherever your host district is and here in 5360. The one thing that is also very important to remember is that if the Youth Exchange Chair here in District 5360 is notified that your host district wants to terminate your exchange because you've broken one of the rules, it's very unlikely that we're going to disagree with terminating the exchange on this side. So if you end up doing something that breaks the rules, and that's why somebody wants to terminate your exchange, the district here probably isn't going to be sticking up for you too much. You may well run into some problems while you're at school, and just like while you're here at home, some of those may involve either class selection, truancy, your performance at school, or being bullied. I've seen lots of those different things happen. If you're having trouble at school while you're on exchange, probably the easiest thing to do is to talk to your host parents and your inbound counselor. They're closest to the situation there. They may know the people involved. They certainly understand the culture and speak the language. So if they're able to help you out, they're probably the first place to go. important to remember that not going to school is not an option for you. You're going to be on exchange and staying in your country on a host visa, which a study visa, which requires you to be in school. So if you're not going to school, your visa can be canceled, and that would mean the end of your exchange. Jaden, you wanted to talk a little bit about school?
No, there's not a lot to say. The only thing is that's again a place where, at the district level, if feel that you've been put into a school that is inappropriate for you, after having given it enough time to actually see whether it's appropriate or not, we're happy to talk to our partners on the other side to see if that's the best situation for you. Um, Often it's a question of culture and not a question of the particular school. So we expect you to be, open-minded and absorbing this new school culture. But if there is something about that particular school that doesn't fit, and you feel that you were put there without a lot of forethought from local Rotary, we can definitely uh, try and help you with that. But we expect obviously that you go in with the attitude that you're there as a student, whether you've graduated or not.
Right. So uh, it is usually the case that you will be going into a school that another exchange student has come out of. So somebody that's going out on exchange from your host district is probably coming out of that school, or at least that school district. In lots of school systems around the world, uh, students get split at a fairly early age into different streams of schooling. So there are some schools that may be more scientifically or mathematically oriented, and some that are more oriented to social sciences and things like that. So you, as a really social science person, may end up in an academic science math type school. And if that doesn't work out for you, Jaden's your guy to talk to. Homesickness. We've talked about this in another session. In fact, our last session, we talked about culture sickness culture shock and homesickness. Your assignment in Google Classroom was to make sure that you had a plan prepared. So I'm hoping that all of you put together a plan and have something in place that you know what you're going to do should you be suffering from culture shock or homesickness while you're away. Your host counselor. Here in District 5360, our inbound counselors take their job as counselor of the inbound students very seriously, and they have a lot of things that they are required to do. That's not always the case when you go abroad. You may not have the same connection with your Rotary Club and your inbound counselor there as you would expect from the interaction you've had with Rotary here. Your agreement, though, so the agreement that District 5360 has signed with your host district abroad says that you have to be assigned a host counselor. And your counselor is really your connection with your club, and in some cases may even be your legal guardian. So depending on how old you are, you may your parents may be asked to sign over legal guardianship of you to your host counselor while you're away. So that person is really kind of important. So it's really important that you try to find out who your counselor is if they're not there at the airport to meet you. And there are times when it's really hard for the students to find out who their counselor is, because lots of times their counselor doesn't speak English very well, or their counselor may be away for a certain period of time during the year. But if you're unable to find out who your counselor is, really important to get in touch with your district there and your club there and see if you can't find out who it is. And if all else fails, get in touch with Jaden, and Jaden can make some inquiries and find out who your counselor is. Jaden, I believe that
It's another one where we have partnership agreements in place, and they have agreed to provide you with a counselor that is supposed to be your touch point in that district. And so I would actually really appreciate for anybody who's over there who has gone a period of time without meeting or knowing their counselor, that they reach out to me and let me know. Because our district is actually a district that a lot of the world wants to exchange with. And if we're sending students to districts that don't support them in the meaningful way that we want them to, we want to know that so that we can make sure that we are always sending students to districts that will have clubs and counselors for the students. So if you do find yourself in that situation, kind of within that first month, please do reach out and we'll make sure to rectify, because I believe in the importance of the inbound counselor.
Right. And the other part to mention is that the guarantee forms that you're going to be getting back that help you apply for your visa usually also specify who your counselor is, or at least who the club president is there, and who your host family is going to be. And we have some contact information from them for that. So if you get back in touch with Jaden and tell him you can't find your host counselor, first thing he's going to do is look up and see who it's supposed to be and start sending some emails. So again, we find it very helpful for you to be in constant contact with your counselor there. And if you can't find them, we will. Host families. Host families are always one of the hardest parts of being on exchange. You're probably going to change host families. You're going to live with 3 or 4 different host families. And living with anybody is hard. Uh, yeah, all you need to do is ask somebody that's been married for a little while. It's not always fantastic. You're going to have good times and you're going to have bad times. So the important thing to remember is when you're going into these host families, you are not a guest. You are expected to be treated like one of the family. And that means that you're going to have chores to do. And it means that you're not going to always get everything that you want. So it's not that the culture is always going to be a little bit different, even in every host family. So if you came to live with me here in Okotoks, it would probably be a little different than living at home. So you're going to have those cultural issues, and you're going to have some communication issues, and living with a host family abroad is never an easy thing to do. But I find that the best way to go about rectifying that, well, 2 good ways. Number 1, make sure you have good open communication. And number 2, make sure that you do the first nice questions. So Rotary has developed a website that contains what we call the first night questions. And these are a series of questions that help exchange students integrate into host families. I find much of the issue that arises is simply a misunderstanding. So I know that when we had our very first exchange student live with us in our home, we had some issues off the bat in that I had a specific time in the morning that I would get up, and we had only 1 bathroom. And so it just so happened that our exchange student got up at about the same time. So just about the time I was getting out of bed every morning, I'd hear him trundle down the hall, go into the room and close the door for half an hour while he got ready for school. Well, that meant, of course, that I was now behind in what I was supposed to be doing. And we could have worked that all out if we'd have just sat and done the first night questions and understood when bathroom time was for everybody. So these first night questions go through part of that. The questions are designed in such a way that you'll be able to bring them up in 2 languages. So you can do them both in English and whatever your host language is. So you can read the questions in English, and your host families can read them in whatever language they speak. And usually between the little bit of English that they know and the little bit of host language that you know and some charades and some Pictionary, you can usually figure out the answers to the questions. And really, they're designed to avoid the kind of misunderstandings that I was talking about earlier, just about things like whether or not you need to do your own laundry, what time supper is, and when you're expected to be home, and that kind of thing. And once you know those things, it makes your relationship with a host family go so much easier. So just from my experience with hosting students, I wanted to give you some keys to having a successful host family relationship. 4 things. Number 1, do what you say you're going to do. If you end up doing what you say you're going to do, it builds a lot of respect and trust with the host family, and that really helps out in the relationship. Number 2, be where you say you're going to be when you say you're going to be there. So these 2 together, I have another little story. We had a girl who came to live with us who was from Venezuela. And the first week that she was staying at our house, there was a school dance on Friday night. And she came up ready to go out to the school dance, and I was going to drive her and then go back and pick her up. And so we talked, and I said, well, what time does the dance end? And I believe it ended at 10 o'clock or something. So she said, I will meet you at the front door at 10 o'clock. I said, okay, that's fine. I showed up at the front door at about 9:45, and there she was waiting for me. So that was great. The very next night was a football game. And I took her and dropped her off at the football game. And I said, what time would you like to pick me up? She said, I will be at the gate at the football game at 9:30. I showed up at about 9:25, and there she was waiting for me. So from then on, things were fantastic. She did what she told me she was going to do. She was where she told me she was going to be when she was going to be there. And after that, I was able to give her a lot more freedom because I knew if she told me she was going to do something, she was going to do it. Next, be respectful and show some gratitude. What you need to remember is that in the vast majority of situations, people that are your host families and really all of the Rotarians you're dealing with are volunteers. Uh, there are a very few situations around the world where host families get paid a stipend for having students. In most cases, that is not the case. So they're not getting paid anything at all to have you there. So they're giving you room and board for nothing. And in most cases, we're really happy to do it. But always nice to say thank you and show some gratitude. The last one, be involved in family life and ask if you can help is always fantastic. So, if your family has an interest in a particular sport and like to go out and watch the games every week, go along with them. Ask if you can help do dishes, ask if you can help do laundry, ask if you can help out cleaning around the house a little bit. And if you follow those 4 things, I can almost guarantee that your relationship with your host family is going to be spectacular.
And the last two will open up a lot of opportunities for you as well, because when that host family is going on a Christmas vacation, they're going to want to take you with them. They're going to talk to you to about you to other people in their Rotary clubs and say, I know you have seasons tickets to a Flames game, whatever the local sport is. Why don't you take this student along? So the more you show that appreciation, the more you're respectful, the more you're part of that family unit, the more unique opportunities will arise for you.
And that just follows kind of into this. So when our exchange students first come to live with us in our house, I tell them right after we do the first night questions that I'm going to treat them like a young adult until they prove to me otherwise. So in most cases, they do just fantastic. They end up getting treated better than my own kids because my own kids don't act like young adults. So, yeah, and Jaden knows them. So, in most cases, the exchange students are absolutely fantastic. You follow those 4 rules we talked about earlier. Act like a young adult, and you'll get treated like a young adult. Jane talked a little bit about this kind of in the reverse situation, but there's nothing that'll turn a host family off faster than if you act like an entitled exchange student. Sometimes exchange students feel that they're guests in their host families. They feel like the host families are there to drive them around and do things for them, pick them up and take them places, get them things, and really that's not the case. As I said, you're not a guest in your host family. You're actually part of the family. So the idea that you would be acting like an entitled person probably doesn't go over well in most host families. And certainly there are some cultures where that's going to be more the case than others. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about the chain of command of what to do when things go bad. So as in most cases where you're having issues, probably the best thing to do is address the problem as close to the problem as you can. So in most cases, if you're having a problem with a host family or with school or with Rotary or with friends in your host country, the first people that you need to talk to are your host family. They're the ones that are you're going to be in contact with every day. They really are surrogates for your parents here, so most of them will be more than happy to try and help you out with whatever situation you might be having. I know lots of host parents that have gone to school to try and rectify some situations for exchange students that while they're there. They'll probably do other things for you with Rotary and just generally try and make sure that you have a good exchange. So your host family is probably the place that you want to start with the vast majority of problems that you have, including problems with your host family. After that, if you're not getting the kind of response that you would like from your host family, the next person that you should probably talk to is your inbound counselor. So this is your counselor at your host Rotary Club. As I mentioned earlier, they may actually be your legal guardian, and they are your connection with the club and with Rotary in general. So each exchange student is to be assigned an inbound counselor, and you should know who that is. So their job really is to make sure that you have a successful exchange. So they're the next person that you should seek out if you're having an issue. After that, it's always good to talk to your outbound counselor. It's really important to maintain some kind of dialogue and communication with your counselor from your sponsor club here in District 5360. They always like to hear from you on a regular basis, and many of them check up with their exchange students while they're abroad on a regular basis. If you're having a problem, certainly you can talk to your outbound counselor. They probably aren't in as good a position to help you out as your contacts in country, but lots of times just the extra voice of maturity and reason can probably help you out with solving a lot of problems. If you're not getting any satisfaction after that, the person you need to talk to is Jaden. Jaden is the person on this side that can make things happen. He has contacts and we have copies of agreements with all of the exchange districts that we're exchanging with, and he's the guy that can help you out. So Jaden, you want to talk a little bit about how that role works?
Yeah, so first I want to tell about a student we've had in the past who followed this hierarchy perfectly. It was just a fantastic example of how to use the system. So she was living in a host family, getting along very well with their host parents, but was feeling constantly bullied by her host sister. And just so happened to go to school with her host sister. And so there was no time when she wasn't feeling bullied by this person. And so she just kind of let it go on for a little while, got her bearings, talked to the host sister about it first, and tried to figure out what the girl's problem was with her, and tried to come to a resolution. That wasn't helpful. Talked to the host parents, who also talked to the host sister. The bullying continued. Um, she then went up to the inbound counselor to talk about what they were going to do about this. At that time, they couldn't come to a conclusion, so she went to the outbound counselor, who phoned me, and then we got connected. And at the end of the day, I didn't have to do anything. Really, she ended up making it so that between her host family and her inbound counselor and her, decided to move her to her second host family 2 months earlier. But I think the conversations that she had with me made her comfortable that that was an agreeable decision for us. And so, that was kind of the best case scenario from what I can see. But there's also like we have contact with all of these people in the other districts, but none of them are my friends. And so if you're having issues and you're not getting resolution, and you've brought it up through the proper ways and nothing is happening, I have no problem whatsoever pushing from this end to make sure that it happens. And we've had cases where we've had students moved from one day to the next because it came to the person who was in my position at the time, and they just made that happen. So we really we believe that we're sending out young leaders, young resilient people who are problem solvers. Um, but that doesn't mean that you have to deal with everything on your own. We have this system in place, and we believe in the Rotary Youth Exchange as the best exchange program in the world because of this system. We have a way of protecting you all the way up. And generally speaking, the people in my position around the world are in that position to advocate for the students. And so, like I say, we're not worried about district relationships. We're not worried about personal relationships. We're worried about the well-being of the student and them having a successful exchange. So if you followed the steps in the correct way, I'm very, very happy to go to battle for you.
Yeah, even as adults, we don't solve all of our own problems all by ourselves. So we certainly don't expect you to either. I mentioned that my children aren't necessarily always young adults. I found this a couple of years ago when I was putting this presentation together. I think this is a good sign. So the part I wanted to mention in the hierarchy is that when we went through and saw who you could talk to about various problems, you'll have noticed that your parents are not on the list. There's a reason for that. Number one, they're very far away. right? They're certainly not going to be the closest person to the problem. They're going to be an ocean away somewhere. Well, in most cases, an ocean away somewhere, and it's very hard for them to do anything about it. Secondly, they probably don't know the language. They probably don't understand the culture. So for them to make any good suggestions for you or to help you out is going to be very difficult. So your parents probably aren't the first person that you want to talk to. So I do suggest, because in today's world, you can contact your parents almost immediately when you have a problem, that you do talk to them on a regular basis, especially if you're having issues. But parents, I want you to understand that your children are just talking to you to vent. They're not necessarily asking you to fix something for them. We have systems in place to help fix things for them. When they talk to you, they're just trying to vent. So trust that your kids are going to be able to figure things out. Trust that Rotary is going to be able to figure them out for them. And when they vent, know that that's what they're doing. I go back to a story I heard a while back. There, in the good old days, it was very difficult for students to contact their families at home. They would have to write a letter, and by the time they wrote a letter and got it mailed, it would take a week or 2 weeks to get from wherever they were in the world home here to District 5360. And then their parents would have to sit down and write a letter and figure out how to solve the problem for their kids and put that letter back in the mail, and it would take another 2 weeks to get there. And by the time the kids got a letter back from their parents, it was 4 or 5 weeks later, and whatever the problem was had gone away. Well, today things are a little different because you can get on WhatsApp or send a text internationally or get on any one of the programs online, and you can tell your parents what the problem is 30 seconds after it happens, and they can get back to you 30 seconds after that. So it's a lot more tempting these days for both parents and kids to try and solve problems together, when really that's probably not the best situation, simply because you're not in the same place. So parents and kids, the kids on exchange always become much more independent people. And that's because we give them this little bit of latitude to make some mistakes and to try and solve their own problems. So parents, trust that they're going to be able to do that. We haven't lost an exchange student yet. And so Rotary is going to look after them, and they're going to look after themselves.
And you'll all notice leading up to this, as before you sent out, when I'm sending messages and emails and everything, it's always to the students. So I'm happy, parents, if you need to discuss something with me, I'm happy to take that call. But my first line of communication is always going to be with the students. We're trying to build that now. We want that started now and to continue throughout the year.
Yes, so definitely parents, a couple of asks of you. Number one, don't phone your kids' school abroad. Don't phone your Rotary Club abroad, the host Rotary Club abroad. Don't phone host families to try to fix things. Certainly you can phone them just to talk and chat, but don't phone them and try and fix things for your kids. And definitely do not go over and try and pick up your student and bring them home from exchange early because they're having a problem. We have ways to fix all those things, so just trust that we'll get it done for you. Our last real slide in this series is make sure that there's no such thing as a small problem. So make sure that you keep lines of communication open. As I say, make sure that you are talking on a regular basis with your inbound counselor, your outbound counselor from here. Jaden always loves to hear from you on a regular basis. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit in another session about the quarterly reports that you have to send back to him. So as long as you're talking to everybody and everybody knows what's going on, that there should be no situation where we're going to have a problem that all of a sudden sneaks up on us that's insurmountable. If we make sure we look after all the small problems, there aren't going to be any big problems. So lastly, just remember, we are here to help. We've been doing this for a long time. The first exchange in District 5360 was way back in the early 80s. So Rotary here has been doing this for a long time, and the system works. So all you have to do is make sure that you follow the system and let us do our job, and I'm sure that you'll have a successful exchange. Jaden, anything you wanted to add to that
I
last
think
part?
just the last thing that I'd like to say is that the vast majority of the students that get sent home or come home early from their exchange aren't sent home for breaking rules, aren't sent home for something they've done. Generally speaking, they choose to come home because there's a problem that has become insurmountable. It's not the students who have followed these steps and gone through the process of using their support system. Those students don't come home. So, you never want to, this is a great opportunity this year. You never want to regret missing out on it because you didn't follow a fantastic system that's already in place.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Jane. And that brings us to the end of this session. So students and parents, I'll get you to return to Google Classroom. I haven't got an assignment in there for you yet, but it will be there shortly. So if you can complete that assignment, that would be great. And Jaden and I look forward to meeting all of you in March at orientation, March 14th and 15th. I got the dates right, Jaden?
I don't have a calendar.
Okay,
Probably
we think. So you will get an email from Annie, who knows more about these things than Jaden and I put together. So
exactly.
again, if you have any other questions or anything in the meantime, do feel free to send me an email as you're going through the Google Classroom stuff, and we'll see you in March. We'll talk to you then.